Amtgard Leadership University. This is a small but targeted Knights panel where we're going to talk specifically about leadership and even more so on that service to the game. What I'm talking about is the flame knight. As is typical, what I'm going to ask you to do is from my left to my right, introduce yourself, give a little bit of a context of why you're on the panel, what you hope we talk about, and we'll see where the conversation goes from there. So.
Hey, I'm Grix, I'm out of the Iron Mountains. I've been a Serpent Knight since 2014 and a Flame Knight for about a month now. I mostly want to talk about the difference between service and leaders of service, and when we should recognize those as Flame Knights versus encourage more higher level activity.
Hi, my name's Cord. I am also out of the Iron Mountains. I am a Crown Knight since 2009 and a Flame Knight since 2014. What I want to talk about today is pretty simple: how to do.
I'm Promethea. I'm from Golden Vale, and I have been a knight since Flame Knight since 2016. And I want to talk to people about treating volunteers better on the basis that our organization falls apart without volunteers. And that's a very core part of Flame Path.
So, Cord, expand a little bit on me. What do you mean by how to do?
How much time do we have?
We have 44 minutes.
Okay, so what I want to talk about with how to do is we have so many people in this organization who have so many different skills and have so many different desires of what they want to see the organization do. So few of those people can actually translate that vision into the actual enactment of that, okay? And there are a few of us who have been very influential in that process. And a number of people have come up and said, how do you get this stuff done? Okay, and so what I wanted to talk about is kind of how, when you've got an idea, to get that idea to inception, what the hurdles are going to be, what problems you're going to run into, what likelihood of failure you're going to have, because you're going to fail, it happens. And so I really wanted to just talk to people about agency and how to enact what they want to do in Amtgard. All right, cool. I have done a lot of things with Amtgard on both the Kingdom and the Inter-Kingdom scale. I am on the Amtgard International Board of Directors. I was part of the V8 committee. I have been very heavily involved in the Circle of Monarchs probably for at least the last 10 years. The vast majority of that is not because of the fact that I have a certain position. Okay, the vast majority of that is because I say, I have an idea, or I have people who have come to me with an idea, and we have the desire to implement this across the game. Everybody thinks that because they don't have that position or that authority, that they can't really get things done within the game. Like you have to be a sycophant of Brennan in order to be able to really achieve anything here. And that's not the case. That's not entirely the case. No. I mean, what you have to have is, there are a number of things that you have to have. The first is you have to have a good idea. Not all ideas are good, okay? But if you have a good idea, then what you need to do is get support for that idea. Start talking to people. Get other individuals on board with that idea, okay? Talk to people who may not necessarily be on board with that idea and find out what their concerns are going to be so that you can address them. Okay. A lot of it is just getting out there and actually doing the work. I'm really fond of saying, and this is not all-encompassing, but I'm fond of saying it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Okay. Amtgard is built on volunteerism. It's built on people who have an idea, implementing that idea, and moving forward. Okay. So if you have these ideas and you don't try to implement them, we're never going to move forward. One of the biggest things that people have trouble with is ideas fail. I would say of all of the initiatives that I've tried to get started, and that, like, there aren't that many of them, but of all the ones I've tried, I have not been able to move forward on probably at least 50% of them. I was talking to Brennan previously, who has by far probably implemented more Amtgard initiatives than any other person in the game. He probably has about an 80% failure rate. Okay, so keep that in mind. You're going to fail. Okay, what you do with that failure is going to be important. Whether you just say, okay, that's it, screw it, I'm out, and stop trying, or whether you go back to the drawing board, revise, and start through that process again. Okay, but really the major thing about doing things in Amtgard is having that idea, talking to people, getting that support, and building that over time until it can finally be implemented.
Does that go on board with what you were talking about, service and service leadership at all?
Yeah, exactly. Kent and I, Cord and I, have done a lot of projects together for Amtgard. And what I was about to touch on was that sometimes when you have an idea and you need some help pushing it through, you need a sounding board, things like that. Finding a team to work with helps a lot. And as far as service versus service leadership, I think a lot of our players get stuck doing, they become the labor force of our game because they feel like they have to work themselves up from the bottom to be able to embody leadership and run their ideas. But to what Cord's saying, it's really important to have these new ideas and bring them forward. And that's the way we advance our game. And we don't need to slog through a bunch of, we don't need to get hours in, have somebody sign off on it before we're allowed to come in and say, hey, I want to do this thing. But you still need credibility to be able to take something and run forward with it. And a good way to do that is to team up with somebody else, a group of people, anything like that. That's a lot of how I'm involved. I'm involved with a number of the same projects Cord is. And that's because we realized a while ago that we work very well together. And so that's been the V8 rulebook, other Amtgard-wide initiatives, a lot of things there in Mountains. We've rewritten Gaporas together. We've run Raggeds together a few times. And I think that's the level of leadership that we need to start transitioning, our players that are interested in Amtgard service towards.
Promethea, isn't there a lot to be said though? You got to do your time before you can try and run something. It's a big idea.
I think, with no offense meant to either of you, that maybe some people lose perspective over time on the fact that name recognition doesn't always exist, and people aren't always the most charismatic. Like, I think we're on this panel with a certain amount of ego set because we are all fairly charismatic, and not everybody is like that. And the organization falls apart without people at the bottom. Like, the way that I overall became a Flame Knight was I did the jobs that nobody else wants to do. And that's both what I do in Amtgard and what I do in my real life, is I pick up things that nobody else wants to do. So for every Cord there is who has really, really fantastic ideas, there's me running around being like, what can I do for you to take some stress off your plate? So I absolutely think some people have really good ideas and can use those to go really, really far. Other people do need to or would like to start from the bottom by doing things until they build up credibility, which suddenly gives their ideas that nobody would listen to before a lot of value, where some people are lucky enough to just be people that are trusted right from the beginning and have that ability from the start.
I think there's a lot of value in that too. To clarify my perspective, it's more the idea that I've seen people be told that they have to do these steps before they should be able to run an event or be in office or any of these things. And while we absolutely need those players, I just don't want people to feel that there's a set path that they have to follow. I don't know how many times I've seen, just people give others hoops to jump through before they're welcome into those things. And I think that if you don't have those ideas, that starting in a place of just somebody tell me how I can help, please tell me what this organization needs, that's a great place to get them. And then in the process of learning how things are done and how events get put on and how the rule book gets made and things like that, you start to develop your own ideas about where you can go with it and how you can move into that leadership level.
So, and I just want to capture, because I think I understand it, but is it right to say it can kind of be deflating if you've got this great idea that you want to pitch as far as running an event, and maybe you do it on the outside, you've got an outside skill set, but we're like, yeah, but this is Amtgard, it's not whatever mundane thing. You need to be taking the trash out for a couple of years before you can run this.
No, then you should swing your weight around a little bit. Because if you have an experience, do it. Like, never go so over the top as to say I really don't ask forgiveness, not permission. Because in Amtgard, people come to this to volunteer and play. You shouldn't do things without asking some sense of permission from other people. Otherwise, you're just being like, cool, Amtgard is going to be run the way that I like it, and deal with it. I have already forgotten the question you've asked, so if you could repeat that again, that'd be
That's okay.
wonderful.
You know what? Actually, I was doing a whole job listening for the last panel, but kind of in line with what you're thinking. I think aligned with too, because let's talk about discouragement, right? And if
Yeah.
I've got the skill set, but we want you to grow the Amtgard way before you get the response.
Oh yeah, no, just if you have a background skill set and it just push you, like, just be like, okay, but like as a reminder, like I'm on the XCOM as a secretary, and that involves a lot of like mediation and like sort of like record keeping for the Circle of Monarchs every year. I'm a community manager in my real life, so I understand how to bring all those people together. And I think that if you can't trust people who have a real world skill set, you're going to lose those people. It is disheartening to be told you can't do something. And it is especially disheartening to be told you can't do something that you and other people know you're very good at. So if it comes up to that and you're like, no, I have 2 years experience event planning, you should absolutely be willing to say that to people. And if those people decide that they don't want your help, that's fine. And there will always be other ways that you can contribute. But don't put yourself in a situation where you have to boss people around in that way either.
So it seems like in Amtgard, we have 2 ways of attracting volunteers. And I say to actively attract. Sometimes you just get lucky and there's people like, I'm here, I'm energetic, and I'm ready to help, right? And they don't need direction, they're just finding something to help out. But the 2 ways are, hey, if you do this long enough, you'll get awarded for it, right? Or there's we're going to guilt you into it because we need it and we're begging for anybody. How can I get involved? Yeah, that's exactly how you get. Thank you, by the way. So, having said that, I forgot my train of thought.
Sorry.
How can we get volunteers? We know we need them. We don't survive without them. What's the trick? What's the secret to that success?
Be nice to people. Don't even necessarily be nice to people, because there are lots of people that I work with that are not nice or kind. Be polite to people and be respectful to people and communicate with people, and they'll want to work with you again. I go now to people and ask them to help me, and they help me because I'm fairly approachable. But I also know that worked in the reverse, that when there were, especially knights in my area that were fairly approachable and they said, hey, come help me move this, I would immediately go over and do it. If you ask actually a good example is last night, Grix and I and a few other people went to dinner, and we went to the diner we were going to closed at 9. And we thought, oh, there's no way we're going to be able to be seated. We've come in exactly when they close. That's horrible. And we both went in and were sort of vaguely apologetic. We're like, it'd be really nice if you could help me with this, but you don't have to. And we totally understand. They let us come in after hours and stay for an extra hour. There was no reason they needed to do that. And they could have said, no, we want to close on time. But we just went in and sort of like, in an open way, just sort of, emotionally a little bit vulnerable, I suppose. But we went in, we were like nice to people, and things happened. And you can do that to volunteers. And even people who are a little bit grumpy on the outside will often volunteer to do things if you ask nicely or politely enough.
I mean, I think that ties into with the communication conversation that we just had, that a lot of the times as leaders, we get frustrated when we need somebody to run an event for us or plan a day for us or do something. And nobody seems to be volunteering. And sometimes we turn towards Facebook posts of, come on, nobody's done this thing. Why won't anybody step up? And that's where it turns into some, less friendly guilt trips that are, hey, somebody do this thing. And, I've definitely heard like, hey, that person's a flame knight. Why aren't they doing this? Or why aren't? And all that boils down to how you treat people when you ask them to do stuff. And I think a good way to get people involved in participating in the organization from a service level is to just early on in the process, before you need volunteers, put out your ideas and say, hey, this is a thing we're working towards. We're going to have a quest coming up. Does anybody have any interest in writing some quest stuff? Oh, well, we're going to need some things made for that. And I can't do it all. And I've seen can't use a sewing machine before. So could somebody else please just, help me out with some ideas? Maybe you can suggest something I don't know, and get people involved in the process early on rather than just being kind of a taskmaster about it. And I think there's a lot of positioning involved in that.
I think additionally, one thing that you can do to try and build volunteerism is a lot of people, I think, don't volunteer because they don't, they haven't realized that they can. Okay. A lot of this volunteerism happens in the background where people don't really recognize it. And secondly, they don't think they necessarily have the clout to be able to step up and do something. Okay. That credibility aspect that we were talking about earlier. So one thing that I found really helpful is if I see a particular individual who I think would be good at something, but who has not at any point expressed interest, to go up and say, hey, I've noticed that you seem really adept at doing X. Have you ever considered trying to do that for Amtgard or something like that? And really trying to just build the idea in their head. And I found that a lot of times that helps encourage them to start thinking about it and start saying, hey, maybe I can actually do this. And doing it more on a they want to basis rather than a they're being asked to basis. Because I think getting volunteers who come in with the desire to do it rather than because it needs to be done are volunteers who are going to be more motivated, more energetic, and probably last longer as far as continuing that volunteerism in the future.
Didn't we do exactly that a couple of weeks ago with Erie who's in the back there? No, it was a, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you ran this park? You seem to be really good at it.
I mean, I think I see probably at least 3 or 4 people in here that I've done that with.
I think that was my most recent example.
So it's still a night now. So we're going to graduate a little bit and go beyond the broad topic of service. So it starts elevating a little bit. How do you gauge level of service? Like Warlord and Orders of the Warrior, it's kind of pretty well defined, right? Even if it wasn't so well in the rule book, even just culturally, we're kind of mapping that out, and then they kind of self-manage. Service is a little bit more difficult. Is it length of service, time to service, innovation? What are some things that we start talking about? And we're going to say we're starting about the 5 or 6 level, right? So when somebody's really been in the game for a little bit of time, you're starting to create a reputation for being service-oriented and kingdom level kind of stuff. What are some things that either can be expected or everybody here, the kingdom level? What are some of the things we start looking at for recognition?
I mean, I look at it in broader terms first, and the things that I care most about are innovation, impact, and consistency. And that's a little bit of what I meant before when I was talked about service versus service leadership is we absolutely need people to run gate every year and cook feast every year and things like that. And those are things that we should absolutely be giving awards for, even high-level awards. But I think sometimes people that aren't involved in those processes see them from the outside. They see things as getting stuck in a rut. And we start having conversations about like, well, is that feast really any better than the last feast? Is that a 9th or a 10th as opposed to an 8th or a 7th, things like that. And I think the way you clearly break yourself out apart from that, and I think this applies to all paths, but the way you break yourself apart from that is to find ways to innovate the process. Somebody comes up with a better system to handle gate issues. Somebody comes up with a more efficient way to feed a number of people, or maybe even a different way to handle how feasts are paid for at an event with an opt-in process or something. And so I try to look for, again, really the biggest one for me is innovation, followed by impact. And then those things, it's hard, everybody can't always innovate. It's not possible. So the follow-up on that is consistency. Is this person constantly doing the best they can to make things go well? And, maybe a process is already working well. It doesn't need to be improved upon, and that's where consistency comes in.
Can you expand on impact a little bit and what you?
Oh, sure. How many people or what geographical chunk of the organization or the longevity of the thing that you're doing? So, obviously there's a different level of service involved at a base level in running a Shire event versus an Interkingdom event. But there's a chance that the person on that Shire event could be putting in 6 months of work to build out the Shire event versus a Kingdom event could be somebody that doesn't care and doesn't do any work. And so your initial level of impact seems bigger because the Kingdom level event or the Interkingdom level event, as I said, might be serving 600 people. But that Shire event has impacted the lives of those players for the next 5 years since the best event they ever attended. And so I think it's really important to just assess the outcome of whatever specific service or body of work is done. There's a different level of impact. I did layout for both the V8 rulebook and the Doran Avatar, and the impact in the V8 rulebook is far greater because it's used by so many more players, and the importance of it being laid out well and understandable is much greater than that of the door, just because the door is a supplemental tool. So I think that's what I mean.
So I kind of want to touch on the consistency aspect because I think that's a pretty major one. And a lot of times I hear people talk about masterhood in terms of a master level project or something like that. Like you had to run they set a bar, and as soon as you do that bar, you're ready. And I don't think that's really a good measure for it. I really think consistency is kind of a defining characteristic of all of the masterhoods that we actually give. Like sword. You don't just have one excellent day and boom, you're a sword knight. I mean, I guess 21 wins in a row, there's the possibility. But that's an incredible rarity. The more common path is you have to consistently perform in 4 tournaments in order to be able to meet Warlord and then be eligible for Sword Knight. Dragon's not as standardized, but the way we've kind of been looking at it in the Iron Mountains in recent years is more, you don't just do a single masterwork project and somebody says, okay, cool, you're a master. You have to show that you are consistently able to perform at that level. And I feel like the same applies in the Flame Path. Okay, you should be able to consistently show that you can perform service at a very high quality level and that you have longevity and will continue to perform at that level in order to really meet that masterhood standard.
I mean, there's no point in time that either of the other people on the panel with me I've thought of as, oh, they're good because they did this one thing. It's, oh, I know I can trust both of them to do any of these tasks because I've seen them do them, over time, or I've heard about them over time.
Which really leads nicely into what I was going to say, is that if you look at my org, all of my roses are for event autocrating. I've never autocrated an event as the head autocrat. I've basically only been quest or trollocrat at any event I've been, and at about 5, I started at the kingdom level and did not stop doing it at the kingdom level. There are people like me who it will take over a decade to get knighted because people go, oh, well, this person only does this one thing. I do not only do one thing. And I know lots of people in my kingdom in any path who do not only do one thing. But sometimes when you get pulled into a role over and over again because of your primary skill set, people forget you have supplemental skill sets. And I think that difficulty and consistency are very, very good gauges, but I think the consistency, depending on where you are and who your officers are, will keep you from being, it's not even about, for Golden Veil, it's not about a masterwork project, although it is about a masterwork project also. You'll get pegged in one role, and then when you get to 7, somebody will say well, she did it last time, so we shouldn't give her another one. And then you get stuck, even if your difficulty goes up, because they use consistency as a reason to not, thank you for what you're doing.
And I don't necessarily mean consistently, this person consistently does this same thing. And that's kind of a tough, thing to look at, because if someone only does one type of service, if they do it really excellently, that's great. But I think if you're narrowly focused, that's where I think impact and innovation come in much more heavily. Because if you do the same thing the same way the entire time, the same way everybody has done it, I think that's going to be more difficult for people to actually recognize than if you have had some sort of major impact or have significantly improved that process.
I mean, I also think that's where our jokes of soup nights come from as well. I hate the idea that Flame is often looked at as the most attainable bell. And I've had conversations with some people about getting rid of the Flame path and folding the requirements for Flame as a requirement for any knighthood. Because I feel like any knight should be able to do the Flame things. But I think those jokes are rooted in reality of, I think there are times in our game where players just do some low-level stuff over and over and over again. And somebody goes, well, it's been long enough. Here's, they see knighthood as a lifetime achievement award. It's here's your belt. Thanks for doing it. And I think, allowing things like that drags the whole system down as well. And so that's why I start pushing for innovation and impact levels.
I think part of that has to do with, and this is a discussion I've definitely had before, about the ambiguity of Rose Lion Smith, which could be its own full topic, is that when you're doing a lot of different things, when kingdoms recognize, or when your park recognizes your ability to do that thing, they will go, okay, well, we know that they've done a ton of stuff in 3 months, but we need a specific thing to give it to them for, because that's how Amtgard works. And they'll pick arbitrarily what they think is the most important one and be like, that's the one. So like using myself as an example, because it's easy to make an example of myself. I didn't just do event autocrating, but because it was the most visible, people were like, oh, well, we'll give you, your 8th and 9th roses for autocrating, even though that wasn't what I was doing. And people don't know what to give awards for in service. People don't know the difference between a rose, a lion, and a smith, and that's super problematic because you'll end up with that horrifying laddering of 5 roses, 5 lions, 5 smiths.
What are all our master hoods?
Rose.
And you're Rose Lion?
Yes.
And then I'm Rose Smith.
Yeah.
So, but it's a lot of those are any of those awards I've gotten at one point in time could have been given for the others.
Because like why wouldn't event autocrating is an office. Is an office, so why wouldn't you give lions for that?
Right.
And like being a champion and building games is part of your job, so that's a lion. Why wouldn't you give a smith for that?
Well, and I have a master smith and like half a dozen lions at best, maybe even less than that, just because it just depended on who was giving the awards that reign.
Yeah.
So things like that make it tough too, and I think we need to look for ways to break out of that rut.
Yeah.
Just
well,
comes back
we
to
talked about it in other panels, or at least Promethea, you and I talked about it, the fact that often it's very well intended, right? It's I'm Monica Barbarani. I want to say thank you to Promethea, and she's at 7 roses, but hey, autocrating is an event or is a leadership role, so here's your 4th line, right? So it's well intended, not always being able to appreciate or understand the unintended consequences.
I've seen the exact opposite of that though, which is harmful. I've seen players. I'm going to switch from flames. I've mostly dealt with this myself with the serpent path, but I've had players go, "Oh, well, you have a lot of dragons, so here's an owl because you don't have very many of those," or vice versa. And I think people do the same with Rose Lion. I just haven't experienced it as much. So maybe that is why I don't have very many lions. Is people decided that. But in the other scenario, I've watched players tell me, I really just don't want to give you another dragon. Here's your 5th owl instead. And so I think that's the part that hits home for me, that makes it kind of rough and confusing for all of our players that don't know where to go. And I think that's when players start getting told like, oh, we'll just keep doing this thing over and over again and I'll have to give it to you eventually. And it's like, it feels like brute forcing a password or something. Like, well, just throw stuff at it and sooner or later somebody will give you a belt.
So other than conversations like this, are there fixes or ways that we can better educate leaders to not spread that word? Not reinforce it by giving those belts?
The Iron Mountains is a fantastic tradition lately. So we've got a fantastic culture, is the word I was originally looking for, of actually having our monarchs talk to other masters and other knights before they give awards. I mean, we tried to push it through. It was Medrin's suggestion, right, for the CN meeting a couple of years ago, where the rule book says that you have to consult your circle of knights, regardless of what the Kingdom Forest says you need to talk to your circle of knights before you grant knighthood. And we want people to do the same thing for the circle of masters. And maybe it's not even specific masters, because that's a tough one, but a master in anything should be at least well equipped enough to help identify potential masters, even in a vastly different area, because there's a common trend in masterhood where you know your area and you're able to spot those like behavioral patterns and things like that in other players. And so I think the biggest solution to the problem is communication with monarchs and public conversation after the fact when awards are given, where we say, hey, this person really deserved this thing. And I don't want to get in the realm of shaming anybody when an award happens that maybe it was too soon, but I think it's definitely worth talking to, a monarch and saying, I really don't think you should have given that. Why did you give it? And then you get to have a conversation about it. And, it's better next time. That's usually my solution to those things.
So, as Flame Knights, is it your job to step out of the way and let the next generation come in?
My knight gave me that. My knight gave me that advice when I took office, or I took office. This is an office. When I accepted my belt, she gave me that exact advice, and I was very hurt by that advice, I guess, because it made me feel like now that you've received your belt, you are no longer useful. Please stop helping. But as a even a master on the flame path, you should just be pulling in other people as fast as possible and being like, hey, you know what? I do this thing a lot and I could really use a buddy. and then finding somebody who has 1 rose and then just bringing them with you all event and, asking what they want to do and saying like, okay, well, I have to clean up the kitchen right now. Do you want to help me clean up the kitchen, or is there something else you want to do? And then just trying to get them into things that they enjoy by, like we talked about earlier, using your social standing to be like, hey, this person who maybe you've met today, I trust this person. Can they help out doing this thing? You should be lifting other people up in any path of knighthood. But masters, people 7 and above should be doing this and like finding people who need a hand and then lifting them up. You don't necessarily need to stop working, although maybe you move out of the spotlight just a little bit to let people come up with you.
Yeah, I don't think that the service has to stop. I think the service has to morph somewhat into, instead of being the one who's constantly doing, being the one who starts guiding others in how to do, and being the one who starts encouraging others and trying to build a culture of doing rather than of sitting around and waiting for the people who are always doing to continue doing. So I think that's an important aspect of it. But no, I would never expect or ask a knight to step aside. That just seems so antithetical to the concept of knighthood. And that's actually, if somebody is looking to step aside and not actually do that path anymore, I'm not really that inclined to knight them, because I want our leaders to be the people who are continuously out there providing that example. If you're not serving, you're not providing that service example anymore.
I mean, it feels like that statement of you need to step aside for somebody else, to have a chance at it, feels like some sort of white belt affirmative action, which is just really cringy to me. And I've never experienced it directly. As a younger player, I actually felt that way about some other players that were in my kingdom, where I felt like they were kind of hogging everything. And it took me a while to realize that, well, they just thought that was the best way to get the job done. And I, for the last number of years, also agreed with that approach. But I feel like when players say you need to step aside, what it means is, well, we're all Flame Knights and Caladri isn't yet, so we need to make room for her to do something. And that feels horrible, because if she's going to be a Flame Knight, then she could make her own room. That's part of the leadership aspect of this, and maybe we'll talk to her and say, hey, do you want to help with this thing? But at no point should I go, well, you and I are both putting in a bid for an event. I guess you should do it, because I've already run a couple of events and gotten awards for them. And so that's what I react to initially when I hear that question.
There is the tiniest grain of truth to it, though, is that when you get up higher in survey or any path, you need to let go of control a little bit. And I don't know about the two of you, although I suspect it's the same. Sometimes I just want to do everything because I want it to get done properly. And it could just be me, although I think Caladri is the same way, that I just want things to be done properly. And sometimes I get nervous about letting other people do them. And the higher up you get, if you do have that personality trait or desire, you do need to let control go, which ties in with what we were saying. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I think there is a little bit of truth to stepping out of the spotlight in that way, is that you may want to control things. And that's why people see you as the person to do those things. You have to let go a little bit. Otherwise, you will actually block those people, because you'll be like, no, I can't. You'll gatekeep them, which is not the right thing to do.
Well, I think Ket and I have had a few conversations where one of us will say something to the other person because we're in the same kingdom and are involved in a lot of things, and the other one will kind of go, hey, actually, maybe it's not so bad. Let's see where this goes. And it's just kind of a reminder, oh, we can take a step back and let other people do things.
There's a part of me that really bristles at the idea that you have to step aside for somebody, as if there is a limited quantity of service that we have in Amtgard, and that, if you take the service, there's not enough left for this person. That blows my mind, because there are so many things that need to get done. Sure, we may not need 50 people in the feast hall, okay, cooking up feast. Too many cooks in the kitchen is probably more likely to ruin things than it is to actually make it better, okay? But there are so many additional things that people can do. You may not necessarily be able to step in and do that one piece that you really want. But if you can innovate and figure out another niche or another area to serve, there's plenty of opportunity out there. And so, I understand the concept, but I feel like that concept that you need to step aside really ignores how much there is to do and how much we need people to do that stuff.
Where is the line between find a niche and fill it because there's too many people in your slot and doing volunteers and that you enjoy? Because those aren't, I don't think that those go together. Like, I definitely do service that I don't enjoy, but it needs to get done because I cannot do service that I do enjoy because there are people doing it already. Like, how do I balance those out? Like, what? Because if you end up in service that you don't enjoy, I guarantee you're going to grind to get your belt, and that's not what we want.
And I think there is really enough service that needs to happen that you don't necessarily need to say, okay, I can't do this, so I have to go here. I think you can really sit down and analyze things and say, okay, there may not necessarily be room for me right here, but there's likely something I can create to have room for me in this adjacent aspect of service.
We'll need service Venn diagrams and then just find all the overlaps.
Yeah, where, okay, like if I'm doing this type of service, what type of skills am I trying to build? Or what type of skills am I trying to utilize? Is there another aspect of Amtgard that I haven't really thought of yet where I can utilize those same skills or where I can build those same skills that is currently underrepresented? You don't necessarily need to say, I can't help in the feast hall, so I have to go haul trash. Okay, that's pigeonholing you into certain aspects of service that have already been done. And that's going to actually cause difficulty as far as innovation is concerned, because you're dealing with what other people have already innovated. And a lot of times they've taken that path pretty far. And going much farther is going to be more difficult. But if you can figure out another area where you can do a similar thing, I think that speaks very highly of someone if they're able to do that.
I mean, use this event as an example. 5 years ago, Clan didn't have ALU panels. I don't think they did 5 years ago. It's more recent. Yeah. And I mean, this is a service that you're providing, that we're all providing by helping teach things to Amtgard. The A&S classes are, I didn't make Clan last year, but in the past years there have been A&S classes, but it's a couple here and there. And 5 years ago, those didn't exist either. You know, Rakis has a quest team that a number of years ago didn't exist. Somebody said, hey, I want to do this thing. Let me run it. Stuff like the kids quest that get run. I don't want anything to do with that, you know, but there are other people that do. And more often than not, when I see like kidocrats come up, it's somebody that has a vested interest in that part of service and says, hey, I want to provide this thing. We say, okay, go for it.
So all three of you are very active in a kingdom. Are there any areas that are really just waiting for innovation and to get some attention?
Recruitment. Like finding ways to recruit in your area, because every area is different. New York City and Toronto are completely different from like, I don't know, like Hagerstown. Like they're not the same, and your recruitment strategies don't work. And diversifying recruitment. How do I recruit women? If I'm in an area with a large minority population of any kind, how do we recruit that when like the three of us sitting up here are all white people? How do we recruit people who aren't white? Because like we don't want to, I could get into this forever and I know you know that, but like how do we make sure it looks inclusive? Because if we're not being inclusive, then we're going to keep drawing from the same pool and we're weaker because of that. So recruitment is a big one. Finding ways to innovate recruitment will be really amazing because there are lots of opportunities there that I don't think we're accessing at all.
I mean, advertising in general is something that Amtgard just completely lacking. And that's not just recruitment, but also just advertising our events better and advertising, you know, our community involvement better when we do things like Food Fight. And I think that Amtgard would benefit from a group of people getting together. And it's a little awkward to talk about because the three of us have had this conversation about us being that group of people, but could benefit from a group of people getting together and you know, building out a marketing plan for us and a strategy and something that we can filter down from the top level and say, hey, here's what Amtgard as a whole is going to do, but here's how you as a part can get in there and do this work.
There's definitely an entity or a skill set that people have. We know what Amtgard have. They just have not reached the right conversation piece, right? To say, hey, look, I can do this for us.
Right, because I mean, marketing, like I work in marketing, and the team isn't, I'm a front-end web developer. I'm not, you know, I don't know a whole lot about sales funnels and things like that, but I also I'm not a photographer. We need photographers to help with that. We need writers to help with these things. We need social media managers. We need people, we need project managers. Like, I think we need to start looking at parts of Amtgard as more of a business, but that also doesn't need to only come into a built-in, like voted on, approved structure or something. Anybody from any park anywhere can, once somebody says, hey, we just really need some good photos. You have good guard. You have a camera. You know how the internet works. Can we please just get together? I'm sure none of the people I pointed at worked out for those. Can we just get together and do something?
Internet?
I was pointing at you, not Alex, for the internet thing.
Okay.
Anything else that's in there that like, man, it'd be great? Those are the kind of people I think are really watching this, right? Hey, I'm interested in service. What can I do? And anybody who's involved in leadership or service, I think at Amtgard knows they have a mile-long list of things they wish they could get to. I don't think we advertise that very well. And maybe this is an opportunity. So what's a list of things that, man, we could really step out on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those are amazing. Like the marketing one is one that's hit home really, really heavily. I think fundraising is something that, like, training people how to do so, figuring out what we actually can do and getting that knowledge out there. I think that's huge.
And do it outside of our members.
Exactly. And whether or not we're allowed to do it outside of our members. I mean, there are so many different questions there that we need people to research. We need people to understand. We need people to teach. Online shared resources, okay, is another huge one. We've got the org. We've got Facebook, but there are so many additional options that we can do. Training people as far as bookkeeping and administration, how to more effectively keep the books, teaching the corporations how to more effectively manage their corporate structure. And what they need to do, what actually needs to be game function. They're
guidance documentation in general.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say
best practices, period.
Supplemental documentation. How do I write a quest? When I've written a quest, why can't I share a quest with a parker who's the same size and lives nowhere near me? Like, there are people, you might go into an area where somebody doesn't have a skill set at all and is not interested in trying, which covers both the things we're talking about. Write a book of 5 quests and, like, send it to another park and be like, I've put in the monsters, all the props you'll need, and the story. You can run this quest now if you want, but you don't have to write it or really prep for it. Like, there's lots of other, like, making the game fun for people outside of your own group is good. And if you have the desire to do those things and your park isn't interested, I guarantee you there's a park that is.
Yeah, grab all of those quests that people have done, build a book out of it, let people use it. There's so many different options that you actually have in order to be able to do service. Don't just think in terms of what we've done for 30 some odd years.
Well, and I think the write a book thing is interesting. I am bad at getting to it because I have that list that you mentioned. But one of the things on my list is writing down battle game books. I write a lot of battle games, and I'm putting together one for what I just ran at Rackus right now. But I think what happens is players start releasing things like that, and other players feel like it's not their place. Luke puts out all the supplemental Amtgard books, and I think people know the Amtgard X stuff very well, and they see Luke put something out and go, oh, well, somebody's already doing it. I think, Gordon, I think you put out a book a while ago, and it's actually a point where I took a step back from my project because you had put something out. I was like, oh, well, I want to talk about this stuff too, but you just put one out, so let me give it some time. But I think other players get discouraged and go, oh, well, there's all these resources. What do I add? And the answer is a lot. Like, that's how we got here, is we started sharing things that we were doing in projects. And like my Rackus battle game book's probably gonna have 5 things in it, but it's still a useful resource.
Well, here's the big thing. What he was saying, Luke puts these out. Luke puts out the final project. Yes. There are so many different people involved in the creation of every single one of those, and that's Amtgard service. Okay. The problem is it's Amtgard service that isn't really visible. Okay, Kingdom Monarchs are not paying attention to the Amtgard X group saying, oh, this guy actually helped, write this monster. Okay, so another thing that we need to do better is figure out how to track what people are doing and make sure that the appropriate people know what they're doing. Okay, if you can figure out a way to track that, awesome, do it. Step forward, I want to get back to something that she said earlier about how she actually hates the forgiveness, not permission thing.
Has this been boiling for a little bit?
It has. It really has.
Close this panel without me addressing this.
So, and I made kind of the caveat, this is not all-encompassing. Okay. There are certain areas where if you're going to serve, you need permission in order to be able to do so. You can't step in and take something that is the responsibility of the monarch and without their permission do that job and expect it to go over well. But if you see a niche that no one is currently doing and that is just going to benefit Amtgard, okay, start looking into it, okay? And service doesn't happen in a vacuum, okay? I haven't done a single thing in Amtgard by myself. Everything has been a group. And talking about the whole credibility thing, okay? Yes, okay? A lot of times if you come in saying, I know a better way to do this, everybody's kind of going to look at you funny going, who are you, okay? What credentials do you actually have? You don't want to come right out the gate blasting, I have this idea, and having everybody suddenly get on board, okay? You need to start slowly. And if you don't have the appropriate credibility, start pinpointing people who have the appropriate credibility, who you might be able to talk to and get involved with.
So it's kind of like asking permission in a way, because you need somebody with credibility to hop on you or advocate for you in some way, because you do need them, because if you don't have them, like, you won't be able to go anywhere with it, because you're just your first
really?
rose Bob, and you don't know what you're doing yet.
That would be a really interesting topic for me to break into, is whether or not that constitutes permission.
I mean, there's a pile of ombudsmen here. Do you want to really talk about permission?
Let's not go that route.
Or like who you're building that network with, right? If that teammate or mentor or whoever you're reaching out to is the monarch, then maybe it's implied permission. If it just happens to be an informal leader or somebody else with experience who can't really grant permission, I think that would be the issue.
And I think I am confused. I love the face you're making. I think I am confusing permission with advocacy in a way, but I'm a perfect example. Would not have been an ombudsman if Brennan and Randall hadn't said, this is a person I want to back. That is asking permission from the circle of monarchs to accept me as a person in that role who nobody knows. But it is also advocacy in that they are working for me rather than like asking.
Well, and that's a defined role, okay? You're trying to step into a defined role. You need permission to do so. I can't just say, I'm the Emperor of Amtgard. You people are not going to accept that and allow it. Okay, you might. I don't know.
If Promethea said it, we'd say okay.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Is that advocacy or should you need permission?
But I would effectively need the circle of monarchs to say, you know what, cool, go for it. That's not going to happen.
I think a lot of this stuff breaks down to when we talk about like running Quest or putting something together. It's not so much you need permission to do it, but it's just a, hey guys, I'm going to do this thing. Is that stepping on anybody's toes? Is that getting in the way? And it's less, can I do this? And more like, sanity check this for me. Make sure that I didn't break something or I'm not going to.
If you're going to build a repository for everybody to throw their Smith items towards, right? You don't necessarily need permission to get the infrastructure in, but you might get the advocacy so that people actually use it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that exact thing has happened, and if somebody ever wanted to build a nicer looking one, like it's very functional, but it's much like some of our other online tools, the UI isn't there. And so if somebody wants to come in and build it, it's way better to say, hey, you've already done this thing. Can I work with you on it? Can I make my own version? Maybe we can, compare notes, than to just say, I've built a better, V8, the V8 rulebook's one for me. A lot of people have complained about the fact that I didn't create it in color. And I have a lot of reasons for that. And the solution people have come up with is to just put out their own versions of the rulebook. And I think it's fantastic if you want to do those things. But they do it in this area where that's a trademark. They do need permission to do those things. And so the AIDOD has had to reach out and say, hey, I love that you did a thing. Stop it. You didn't go through proper channels. So I think it just depends on what you're working on, and there's just no scenario where, unless you're very experienced, like I know what I can and can't just do. If you don't know for certain that you can just do something, go talk to somebody else that's been around for a while and see what needs to be, happen, what the procedure is.
I'll take it back one notch. From permission, you need buy-in. Or you need early adopters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kind of need all of those things to really succeed, right? Getting the buy-in with some good, if you got some people with advocacy that can help you get that buy-in, and then identifying if they're the right people advocating for you, they can say, hey, that's a great idea. You should probably reach out to the AIDOD because you're going to need permission to move forward. It blends together, right? So don't keep it a secret. And if you do, don't be surprised that maybe you shouldn't have been doing it. or it'll be a huge success. You gamble.
Well, I mean, somebody just asked me the other day, like, hey, I want to use the rulebook images. Who do I talk to? It's like, oh, you talk to the ALU and sort it out with them. They own that stuff. And that could have easily been 6 months down the road. They've created a project, didn't talk to anybody in the ALU, said, sorry, like, we're mad at you now. You've ruined Amtgard forever.
Remind me to respond to that email.
This doesn't help the shadow government image.
So I want to mention something as far as what I was talking about. I was talking big, okay? I am talking ideal situation, okay? And I realize there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of roadblocks. You know how I said there's that failure rate? What we're talking about here is a large reason for that failure rate, okay? This is something that you do need permission to do, or it's something that goes against, I mean, there are so many different reasons why you could potentially fail at a particular thing that you want to do, okay? But if you don't try and you automatically assume you're not going to be able to do it, you're never going to get anywhere, and our game is not going to progress. And so what I'm trying to do in saying this is not necessarily tell you here's the process, because the process is going to be different every single time. These are some general steps that I and others have taken to try and get things moving as far as Amtgard is concerned. Do that whole buy-in thing. But what I'm trying to say is don't give up before you get started, okay? And be willing to do the work in order to get where we need to be, okay? Those are really some of the big things. Yes, it's not as easy as what I was stating at the beginning. My job here is more to motivate people than to give you a concrete outline of how to serve, okay? Because if I'm doing that, you're serving in my mode. You're not serving in your mode. You're not innovating, which, as we've talked about, is a really important aspect.
On that, I think that's a great way to end the panel. So if we could, starting from the right to the left, just a couple of those foot stomps. Somebody only watched the last 5 minutes, catch up what Corey just said. What are those other foot stomps that we hope that they take away from either the panel or maybe inspires them to go back and watch the entire thing?
Thank your volunteers, so you'll lose them. Try not to get stuck taking ownership of things that other people could be helping with. Just diversify in general and make sure you just take care of your volunteers and thank them. And people who are happy are more likely to try other things and innovate if they don't feel pigeonholed in something else. So just treat everybody properly. And kind of like Cord was saying, just make sure that when somebody shows an interest in something, you just take them along and make way for them to do things.
Don't be afraid to get out there and try. Don't let failure stop you from stepping out of the room. Okay, that is the easiest way to ensure that you fail, is not to actually try and do it. If you fail, don't get discouraged and stop trying. Keep going. Try something else. Okay, if that doesn't work, go another direction. Okay, but overall, if you are interested in serving and you have ideas that you think are beneficial, also don't beat a dead horse. Okay, if an idea doesn't work, and if there's so much against it, don't keep pushing that same idea, okay? Because you're probably going to destroy your ability to get buy-in on future ideas as well, okay? Know when to quit, but don't give up before you try.
Service without passion leads to burnout. If you're looking for ways to serve, find things that you're passionate about, and figure out how to work those into projects. Don't just do things because they need to be done forever. Obviously, that has to happen sometimes, but don't let yourself get stuck with that. That's why we quit Amtgard. That's why we go find other games to play. That's why our small parks fall apart, because we just don't fill the things that we're passionate about.
Great. Thank you all for your time this evening. Really appreciate you spending an hour of your event with us. And I know most of you sat, if not all three of you sat through some of the earlier panels, so again, thank you for that. If I could, a huge round of applause for our panel. And even bigger round of applause for the amazing volunteers. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. Appreciate your time.
Nice goal, Greg.